something like a breakup. I think a lot of adults might look at that and think, oh, it's just teen love, just a breakup, when in reality, that can really hurt. And that can feel like the end of the world for someone going through it, if that's someone that meant a lot to them and that was a relationship that was really important to them. So I think understanding events like that as well, and how that could also be something that is a catalyst for this negative relationship with our bodies and food, is really important too.
Well, welcome to the Generation Youth Podcast. I'm your host, James McLamb. We're back again with another exciting episode. Someone that I recently was connected with by a mutual friend whose story and mission to help youth is going to inspire you and also, I think, give you some insights on how you can help the youth that you work with better realize their full potential of self-esteem. I'd like to welcome Morgan to the show. How are you doing today, Morgan?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, I'm excited about the conversation that we're going to have, and really on the conversations that we've already had. I felt a great deal of synergy as we've talked before. But before we dive into this question, and it's one of the, ironically, and I'll say this beforehand, where you land at as far as your mission happened to be on our schedule of things that we're posting on our social media, happened to be very similar to this. So I've been kind of thinking about this all day as our social media team's been checking out stuff and doing stuff, so it kind of works. But before we jump into all that, our audience would love to hear from you about you. They'd rather hear you tell your story than listen to me. They get tired of hearing me. I'm sure of that. So Morgan, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself to the Generation Youth audience.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Morgan Hannaleck, and I am a mental health speaker, author, and therapist. I specialize in helping people connect with their authentic selves, break through issues with self-image, and become their healthiest version of themselves.
Now, how did you get started in this? What prompted you to go into this field? Because these types of things are, it's not like a career day. You go to a career day and there's a booth there and you're like, oh, that's what I want to do. Most of the time, if you're moving into this kind of area field, something has inspired you, something has driven you. It's a passion that you have. So what caused that to happen?
Yeah, I would say a lot of this has come from my own experiences with struggling with my relationship to myself. So growing up, I really struggled with believing in myself, having confidence, my self-image. And throughout my high school experience, I actually developed an eating disorder. And I got to the point where I was actually hospitalized for that eating disorder and started to go through treatment. And while I was going through treatment in that hospital, that was the first time I ever felt like someone could actually see and understand me. And that really helped me realize that we need to all connect with our authentic selves in order to heal. And I think a big reason that I got sick in the first place is because I was so disconnected from my authentic self and was trying to be something that I wasn't. And that led to not only just the eating disorder, but also anxiety. It led to depression. It led to insomnia. It led to a lot of really dysfunctional relationships, which ultimately was a mirror of the dysfunctional relationship that I had with myself. So because I went through all of that and went through a really long journey of recovery, I saw along the way a lot of problems that other people were having with their self-image and connecting to themselves. And I really wanted to be a reason that people could solve that problem and inspire people to connect with their authentic selves and just feel hope for recovery and healing.
I love that you have that mission on your life and that you do that. It is, in our research at Generation Youth, we've come to realize that dealing with self-image is the largest issue that youth self-report that they struggle with. They say, hey, we struggle with, they don't ever say, oh, I struggle with self-image. They'll use other verbiage, but it falls underneath that. And from your story, it's very common with young ladies, that they struggle a lot with how do I look, how do I perceive, how is going on. So what are you seeing teens, especially, let's land first with young ladies, especially, because I think that's probably a bigger issue. Guys do struggle with it, but they have a little bit different, comes from a different viewpoint than the young ladies. So share a little bit about what your insight is on what they're seeing, what's happening, what's going on in their mind. So mom and dads that are listening can get a better insight to what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with a lot of young women, there's this incredible pressure that we're getting from social media, from diet culture, from all of these places that are telling us if we look a certain way, then that means we'll be worthy of love, acceptance, and connection. And as humans, we are all hardwired to need love, acceptance, and connection. And I think for a lot of young women that are looking at the media and seeing that women that might be looking a certain way are receiving those things, they're going to want to achieve that as well, again, because we all do need that. And I think that incredible pressure to look a certain way and be a certain way really weighs on young women and can cause them to go to these extreme behaviors of self-harm and restricting their food and going to just extreme lengths to achieve this ideal that we actually constructed as a society.
I think that's the first time I've heard someone really connected in that way, in a very clear and concise way of saying, hey, they need love, they need acceptance, they need connection. We know that. That's what we're created for. We're created for this kind of relationships. And they perceive others getting that and they equate it's because of the way they look. This other
Mm-hmm.
person looks. I don't look that way. And therefore, I need to do this that is going on. So how do we help them realize this? Because I'm a mother. I'm a mother. Oh, that was dumb. I'm a father of two girls, and my oldest is 24. My youngest is 14, and they both have struggled in some ways. The oldest is a little bit more self-reliant, self-confident. She was very athletic and was able to find her in it, but she still struggled. Hey, I don't look like I should. I think I've gained too much weight or this. But the youngest is a lot more. Hey, I don't, this is not working. I don't fit in. Just coming out of middle school, which is like, the pitfall for girls. She
Yeah.
was dealing with that. I would say, how do we help them? How can we help these young ladies realize their authentic self, to use your term?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things there. I think one thing is being able to talk about all different bodies and celebrate them in ways that are one neutral, where I think when we talk about bodies and what they can do for us, that creates a lot of power and separates this idea that we have to love our bodies. Because I think that's another concept as well that a lot of us really get caught up in, is this expectation that we have to love the way that we look all the time, which isn't necessarily true. We can simply be neutral and appreciate the function that our body has, because it is the vehicle that we have to take us through the world, which is a really beautiful thing when you think about it in that context. As well as, I think sense of self is another huge part of this equation, where when we're associating all of our worth and whether we'll be accepted or not into the way that we look, we're missing so many other things about us that we could really build on. Where when it comes to sense of self, there are so many things that make us a person, that has to do with our personality, our interests, who we connect with, what we value. And when we can really connect with all of these different buckets and things that create our sense of self, that takes a lot of pressure off of that one thing regarding how we're looking in any given moment.
One of the points that came up today as they were adjusting their social media thing, dealing with body image and how to help youth understand that is that help them understand that it's more about their health, their strength, and their energy than it is their appearance at that age. That's a hard thing for them to understand, because they're looking at their phones. I'm holding up a phone for those of you who are listening, and they see these things on both social media and regular media, and they're saying, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be. This girl on this television show, she's my age and she's thin. When she doesn't know what the producers of that show are making her do
Right.
to look like that. How do we help them realize that? Because that's a tough thing. They're going to look at parents and say, you don't understand. It's different nowadays. We've all said that.
Right. Yeah, I think for parents, it can be kind of that concept of multiple things being true at the same time, where we can acknowledge that there is a pressure and we do want to feel good about the way that we look when we show up in the world. And at the same time, it's also really important to connect with how we're feeling, where, especially when that
Mm.
comes from also the standpoint of how we move our body and what we eat as well. When it comes to intuitive eating, for example, that doesn't mean just eat all the foods that don't have any nutritional value either, because that's not going to make you feel good. I think a big part of this is acknowledging and validating that the way that we look does matter to a lot of us, and we can't deny that. I think that's something that we all have experienced, and at the same time, how we feel as we're navigating the world and doing the things that we love is so important to connect with too.
If you wouldn't mind, could you share maybe how a little bit that you feel comfortable with sharing your journey of where you were and what the things that you realized? I think it would resonate with some parents to see, hey, you can get through this, and maybe even give them some insights and some tips to be able to look and see this happening in my child.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for my own personal experience, because of that weight that I mentioned earlier, I was putting so much weight and importance into the way that I looked. And I became
Hmm.
really obsessed with my image and what I was eating, how I was exercising when it comes to the eating disorder and everything. And I think a lot of that had to do with control as well, where I felt really out of control in a lot of areas of my life. And I felt that that could control the way that I connect with others and my sense of self-worth. And throughout my recovery, I, one, gained a lot of education about what it means to actually nourish my body and feel good in my body, because I also had a really distorted view on what that actually meant to take care of my body and feel good in it. And I think that a lot of that boils down to diet culture and the messages that we're taught about what's right to eat, what's not right to eat, what's the perfect diet, when in reality, the perfect diet is the one that makes you feel good. But that's not something we're really explicitly taught in schools. And another part of that is being able to realize that I can find my people and they don't have to be the people that I originally thought that they were in these scenarios where I think throughout my eating disorder, I was getting validation from people when I was losing weight. I was getting told that I looked good. I was getting more attention. And now I realize that those weren't necessarily my people. And that the people that I connect with now, they don't say that they're my friend because I look a certain way. They say that they're my friend because I have a kind heart, because we have the same values, because we laugh about the same things and find the same things funny. So I think really narrowing down that focus on why you're connecting with people and having those shared values is so important.
Morgan, that's a great point that I don't think they realize is people don't choose friends, not true friends anyway, maybe acquaintances they want to hang out with, but they don't choose true friends based on how they look. They based on because of the common interest, because they support each other, because they allow them to be their authentic selves. So
Right.
that's it. And when you said that I felt out of control and doing controlling the eating gave me that control back. That was a new concept for me. I had never thought about that before. That what do you mean by break that down? Because that really, I was like, oh, I wrote that down and put some stars beside of it because I was like, out of control. I felt out of control. What does that mean?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about my personal experience and how I think that also can relate to a lot of other people in this place. Where for me, a lot of my eating disorder tendencies actually started after a breakup when I was in high school. And this was one of my first relationships ever. And I didn't really understand how relationships worked. And I got really attached to that person because prior to the relationship, there were a lot of factors that made me feel like I was really lonely and unworthy. So when I got that taste of that love and connection in that relationship, I became really attached and obsessed in this relationship. So when it ended, I felt completely out of control, and that the only way that I could gain control back in my life and feel okay with myself and the skin that I was in was if I could control what I was eating. Because at the end of the day, I couldn't control that that person broke up with me. I couldn't control that they weren't taking me back when I wanted them to take me back as a young girl. But what I could control was what I was eating. And that became something that was almost a distraction from the pain that I was feeling inside. I think what a lot of people don't realize with eating disorders is similar to the way that we put on masks and hide our authentic selves. It's another way to disconnect from ourselves. When we're controlling our food or obsessively exercising, we don't have to connect with those really uncomfortable feelings that we might not feel resourced to be able to overcome. Where the eating disorder, in a way, was essentially a really maladaptive way for me to cope and disconnect with myself because I felt so out of control, so unworthy, and so uncomfortable at that time in my life.
Wow. Now I want to know if I'm a parent, how do I see this? How do I see this in my child? You got any tips for me that I could be looking for, in the young daughters and even sons that we have? What do we need to be on the alert for?
Yeah, I mean, I think any kind of behaviors in or behavior changes within eating patterns. I think for me, something that was really noticeable was I drastically started to change the things that I was eating and the content that I was eating. I think weighing and measuring food is a really big one, which is tricky because measuring food and weighing food, unfortunately, is something that's really common within the fitness world and diet culture. And I was
Yeah.
actually in that world for a while. I used to be a bodybuilder. So I definitely know firsthand what it's like to be in a world where that's actually praised and you're told that you have a lot of discipline for controlling your food like that. So I think if someone, like a teenager, for example, wasn't weighing their food before, wasn't really paying attention to the content in their food, and suddenly is paying a lot of attention to it and weighing things, I think that's a really big one. I think isolation is a really big thing. I think eating meals away from you is a really big thing, or avoiding restaurants is a really big thing too. I think a lot of these behaviors around food and the relationship to food is really huge too, where some of the talk that you hear your kid have around food can also be a really big signal that something might be wrong. Where, for example, labeling foods as good or bad foods is a really big one within diet culture. When someone says, I can't eat that piece of cake, that's bad, that could be a red flag to disordered eating. Because I think the goal of recovery and making a peaceful, healthy relationship with food is knowing that food is meant for so much more than just fuel. It's also meant for celebration. It's meant for connection. It's meant for so many things other than just fuel.
Yeah.
And to look at it like that and make peace with all these different foods while also paying attention to, again, what makes you feel good is really important in having that healthy relationship with food and your body.
Wow. So many thoughts are just coming to mind. And it's not just the negative, we think about eating disorders. We think about, people trying to get themselves thin, get self down, but it could be people are out of control and are going the opposite way as well. Is there anything that we can share about that? I mean, that's an obvious thing that people might look at, but still there's some things going on mentally.
Definitely. I mean, I think that if there's a big event in someone's life that creates some sort of grief or loss, or again, that feeling of being out of control, I think that's something to really look out for. And coupled with some of these behaviors that I mentioned earlier, where, especially for youth and teenagers, these things, like such as breakups and friendship breakups, anything within relationships, they carry such a big weight. And I mean, we know this. The research says that the way that our peers view us is so important for our development
Yeah.
as we're moving throughout adolescence. So, something like a breakup, I think a lot of adults might look at that and think, oh, it's just teen love, just a breakup, when in reality, that can really hurt. And that can feel like the end of the world for someone going through it if that's someone that meant a lot to them and that was a relationship that was really important to them. So, I think understanding events like that as well and how that could also be something that is a catalyst for this negative relationship with our bodies and food is really important too.
Wow. Let's speak now to the young person who's listening, and they are seeing a little bit of themselves in your story, and they're seeing a little bit of what you're sharing, and they're a little self denial that they're actually at this point. What can we share with them for an encouragement to help them on their journey? Maybe to give them a spark so that they could say, "Hey, I need some assistance somewhere on this." What can we say to them?
I think some of my best advice for a situation like that is to really take a minute to slow down with yourself and be honest with yourself. Because I think when we're in a state of denial, we're usually in that state because if we were to slow down with ourselves and connect with the feelings that were really underneath that denial, it might feel too painful or too overwhelming. So being able to slow down and be honest with ourselves, also in controlled spaces, whether that be when therapy or with that trusted adult, I think is really important too. A big part of my story and when I actually got help is when I slowed down enough with myself to realize I wasn't actually living my life. I was just surviving and going through the motions. And I thought to myself, I wonder what it would be like if I actually lived. And I was only 17 at this time. But when I had this thought to myself, it wasn't just a random thought that I was having. That was me slowing down enough to actually listen to my inner voice and listen to that deep intuition inside of me that knew there was more to life. And I think that we can all do
Mm.
that, but in a space where it's supportive and feels safe, usually with that trusted adult or a mental health professional, teacher, school counselor, is really important because it can feel really overwhelming to slow down and actually listen to that inner voice and what I might be telling you.
Did you come to this realization, kind of on your own? Was it self-evident to you, or did someone, this trusted adult, or maybe even a friend, come and say, "Morgan, we feel like there's something going on here"? I mean, how did that work for you? That caused you to kind of make that turn to recover back, make that journey back?
I think a lot of that came from myself and being so frustrated and fed up with the way that I was living every single day, where I would go to school and I would see people laughing with each other. And there was a point where I wondered how people would laugh and get into those laughing fits. Like I was so disconnected and felt
Mm,
so unhappy with myself. And I was going through this same life pattern every single day where I would go to school, I would go to my part time job, I would go home, I would sleep, and I would repeat. And most of the time, I was thinking about food because I was depriving myself. And that wasn't something that was happy for me. That wasn't actually living life. And because I was seeing all these people around me, somehow just enjoying life so much more than me, I knew that something was wrong. And this realization came from feeling all those feelings at once and just feeling frustration, which I think also is a testament to how sometimes anger and frustration can actually drive us into action and make a change in our lives as well.
yeah, that's a great point. I was just thinking when you were saying that is too, there may be some person who is in this situation and their friends are seeing it. What would you tell a friend? How to intervene and stay that friend? I mean, because I'm thinking, wow, there's so many angles of this. It's such a delicate situation, but also a very weighted one that does not need to be tiptoed around, but it does need to be addressed with compassion.
Totally. And I think when it comes to youth, I always try to remind them about that trusted adult and why talking to that trusted adult is so important. Because when I reached out for help, I reached out for help to my parents. And
Hmm.
they ended up finding me this hospital that I ended up getting admitted to. And a lot of the therapists that I worked with after, they had found me. So those trusted adults have access to the resources that we need to get better when we're in this really dark space. And I think a lot of the time when you're the friend, you're really scared. What if this person's going to be mad at me? What if I lose a
Yeah.
friend? But I think a mantra that I really like to talk about when I talk to youth is that I'd rather lose a friendship than a friend. And down the line, being able to speak up and say something for someone that could really lose their life from what they're going through is way more powerful than staying silent.
Hey, audience, I want you to hear that again. It's more important to lose a friendship than a friend. Wow, that's hashtagable right there. That's major right there. And when you said that you went to your parents first, I was so excited to hear that. And then the first thought that came through my mind is that how parents are going to react in a variety of different ways. Any advice to help them from your own experience or what you've learned over time is a way to guide them through? Because I can see a parent just freaking out. I can see
Yeah.
moms just going ballistic and get, oh my gosh, what is wrong? Just going over, you're going to eat, sit down here, we're going to get this thing going. And other ones being maybe too gentle with it and not addressing it. Shame being a factor that a parent feels, and so they don't want to not know how to help. How do we guide them through this process? Wow, there's so many different layers to this conversation.
There really is. I think with that, because you make a really good point about there's a balance between being
Hmm.
too lax and being too strict or projecting all of these really scary emotions that would likely be coming to a parent in a moment like that. Because to validate the parent, I mean, that is really scary to know that your child is suffering. And I think being able to find this healthy middle ground of being able to stay calm and create that safe space for your child to come forth and say, this is what I'm feeling and I'm struggling and I need help, and really positively reinforcing that and thanking them for coming forth and trusting them with that information, while at the same time showing them that it is a serious matter and you
Hmm.
care and you're going to help them get that help. Because that's what that healthy middle ground looks like, is knowing that it's a safe space, but also knowing this is serious and I'm here to support you and we're going to do something about this.
When you go and speak to youth groups, you're speaking to schools and youth conferences. What is your message? What are the points that you're sharing with them? What are you saying with them?
One of the big things that I always tell youth is that it's never too late or too early to get help. And when I tell
Wow.
my story, you can clearly see that I waited way too long to get help. And you don't have to be as sick as me or look as sick as me, because mental health conditions do not have a look, not even eating disorders. You can never tell what someone's going through simply by looking at them to be worthy of help. And that's another big message too, is I want everyone to know that everyone's as equally as worthy of help, no matter where they are in their healing journey or how long they've been struggling for. And I think lastly is also owning that inner voice and connecting with their authentic selves and helping them realize that there are people out there that want to accept them and are going to accept them and embrace them for exactly as they are without putting that mask on.
So where are you speaking at? Where are young people hearing the message at for Morgan?
Oh man, all over. I think, well, right now I'm actually in Southern California. So I've done a lot of speaking engagements within the San Diego area, some in Anaheim, some in the LA area, but I've also been in Massachusetts, which is actually where I'm originally from, in the New England area. I've been to New York, I've been to New Jersey, I've been to Minnesota. So all over, but my main base is California.
And you go into schools? Is specifically schools you're hitting and targeting?
Yes, so I do a lot of schools, but I also do community organizations. I also do colleges. So
Mm.
definitely a variety. And I definitely tweak some of the messages that I have and some of the stories I tell based on the audience I'm speaking to.
So the messages, the titles, or themes of them, so that someone who's out there listening is like, "Hey, I'm a PTSA member here. We need this in our middle school. This is the message we need." So, what are some of them there?
What are some of what? Sorry.
Your titles, your keynote messages.
Oh, yeah, I would say that my main keynote is called Beyond My Mask. My personal brand and business is called Beyond Your Mask. So I think it's really powerful when I tell my personal story to name it Beyond My Mask, because I'm telling my story of how I moved beyond my mask and connected with my authentic self, and also found people around me that I could connect with that accept that authentic self too. So I think that's really important. I also lead a workshop called Unmasking Unhealthy Relationships, where
Mm.
I really help young people determine what makes a healthy relationship, what are red flags to look out for in relationships, and how can we build both a healthy relationship with ourselves and others. So I think that there's a huge relational piece as well to the things I speak on.
Yeah, you're so right. And I love the concept of moving beyond the mask, because when you said that again, I'm visualizing all these young ladies and gentlemen who are, you know, who really, they walk into school every day, and before they enter the door, they're putting on that invisible mask of trying to be something they're not. And I've had a lot of time since I'm older to reflect on my own high school experience, and where was there a mask? And yes, definitely as I entered school there was, because I came from a very, very small elementary school. It's a K through 8 school, very small. Nobody moved in or out much. I mean, we've who you started with in kindergarten, who left in 8th grade, give or take 4 or 5 people. I mean, it was that kind of group. And you go to a larger high school where 5 of these small schools is together, and you wanted to, it called, the size of it caused you to want to put a mask on more in that thing. So I can definitely see that. I mean, they're putting on that invisible mask. This is who I need to pretend to be in order to fit in, to be loved, to be accepted, and to connect with people. I got to do all those things. Wow, that's I love that message.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's important to also realize that when we put on that mask, we're building relationships as a faulty version of ourselves too. So those
Mm,
relationships also aren't even authentic as well. So when we can take off that mask, all of our relationships become more rich and authentic too.
mm. The second biggest problem that we found, the first one was self-image. The second biggest problem that you self-report is relationships. That is the second biggest one that they deal with. So though, and the third one, just for noting, is their lack of purpose in the goal, ability to set goals for that purpose. But all three of those are is like a Venn diagram in a way, that they all are interconnected. And if you have purpose, it's going to help your self-image. It'll help your relationships. If you have healthy relationships, it's certainly going to help your self-image and help you find purpose. So, but they got to work in tangent with each other as we develop those going through. So, any closing things on what your message? Because Warren, this is so heavy about what we need to be working with. I wish that I had thought about this. You may know this. Is that, do we have an idea what percentage of young people are struggling with some kind of eating disorder? Is there a stats out there that we know of? Or
I want to say the most recent stat I looked at was 1 in 5, but don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure
that's
of
probably not too far off, though.
what the updated stats are. Yeah.
Yeah, what we see is a lot of these stats are scary high. And, if you ask parents about it, they probably would give you the 1 in 20 answer, or oh, it's 5% or maybe 10% at the most. But you ask youth, it may even be higher than the 1 in 5, what they perceive.
Right.
But that is pretty high on this. So how can our audience connect with you to find out more about what you're doing, and where to connect, see? Where are you at on this worldwide internet interwebs?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's morganhannaleck.com, and also beyondyourmask.com goes to the exact same place. And on there, you can see a little bit more about my story and the workshops and keynotes that I offer, as well as there's a tab for free journal prompts. And the reason that I put that there is just because writing was such a big part within my recovery, because I think that when you're having so many anxious thoughts, to put it out so it's not necessarily always living in your body anymore is really important. So I put some free resources up on there. And then I also have an Instagram account called Morgan Hannaleck, and also Beyond Your Mask. And on Beyond Your Mask, I also post a lot of free resources and just education about mental health. So again, some of my own experience as well, navigating my own mental health, tips, tricks, quotes, things like that. So I would say those are the main places to reach me.
Well, Morgan, thank you for your time today. This is the second time in the Here She Is podcast we've kind of dived in this issue, and I don't think we hit it enough. I don't think we're really addressing enough, because it's kind of like a hidden problem, a problem that is there in every school, in every church, in every community, and a lot of times it's either brushed to the side or not admitted at all, because someone can have this eating disorder and have the outward appearance of everything is cool and fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that one that looks like they're about to, so thin that they're about to, fall apart. It can be someone who has that appearance, but you don't know what's going on behind there. So thank you for this. This is really an important issue. I'm so grateful for your calling on this.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be on. Thank you so much for having me.
And audience, I want to thank you guys for sticking with us. Look, if you've been with us over 30 minutes, either one or two things are going on. You left the podcast on by accident, you've wandered off and you're not listening to anything, or you're engaged. And I hope you're engaged. And if you're engaged, then you know what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to comment on it. I'm going to ask you to like it. But more importantly, I want you to share this episode, share this content, share the way to connect with Morgan with someone who doesn't know about this. Because we need to get this message out. We need to connect them with resources. They need to hear voices that can provide them with encouragement that they can get through this, that they can move beyond their mask and be forward. So, audience, thank you for being with us. Morgan, thank you for her time with me together. All the links and everything that she mentioned are going to be in the show notes, so you can find those today. Thank you again. Thank you for your time today. Audience, be back real soon with another episode of the Generation Youth Podcast.